Imagine setting out on a road trip, the excitement of the open road stretching out before you. The promise of adventure lies just beyond the horizon, but what if the road held something else? Something sinister, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. These are not just stories, they are chilling encounters with the unknown, where a routine drive turns into a nightmare. From the ghostly hitchhiker haunting Route 66, to the forgotten motel hiding dark secrets, to the relentless pursuit of a phantom truck and the cursed town that traps all who enter. My name is Jake, and I never believed in ghosts until the day I drove down Route 66 with my girlfriend Emily. What started as an exciting cross-country road trip turned into a nightmare that still haunts us to this day. It was the summer of 2022. Emily and I had planned the trip for months, eager to explore the famous Route 66. We wanted to see the quirky roadside attractions, experience the nostalgia of the old highway, and make memories that would last a lifetime. But we never expected the kind of memory we would end up with. We had been driving for hours, passing through the desolate stretches of Arizona. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the road. The desert was beautiful, but it felt eerily empty. The road stretched on endlessly, with no sign of civilization in sight. That's when we saw him. A man was standing on the side of the road, his thumb outstretched in the classic hitchhiker pose. He was tall, with a gaunt face and clothes that looked a little out of place, like they were from another time. He had a worn-out leather jacket and jeans that seemed faded from years of use. His eyes were hidden behind a pair of dark sunglasses, even though the sun was already dipping below the horizon. Emily and I exchanged a glance. We both felt uneasy, but we didn't want to leave the guy stranded in the middle of nowhere. Maybe his car had broken down, or he was just trying to get to the next town. Against my better judgment, I pulled over. The man walked up to the car and leaned into the window. "Mind giving me a lift?" he asked in a low, gravelly voice. There was something off about him, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Emily gave me a hesitant nod, and I unlocked the doors. He climbed into the back seat, and I noticed a chill in the air, even though it was a warm summer evening. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just nerves. We introduced ourselves, but the man didn't offer his name. He just gave a vague response about heading west. As we continued driving, the conversation felt forced. The man didn't say much, and when he did, his answers were brief and cryptic. There was an awkward silence that hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. I tried to focus on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then, out of nowhere, the man started humming a tune, a low, haunting melody that sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't a song I recognized, but it felt old, like something you'd hear in a ghost story. Emily squeezed my hand, her eyes wide with fear. That's when it happened. I glanced in the rearview mirror to check on our passenger, but he was gone. The back seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes, causing the car to skid to a stop on the side of the road. Emily and I both turned around, but there was no sign of the man. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. My heart was pounding in my chest. I jumped out of the car, expecting to see him walking away or hiding in the shadows, but there was nothing. The desert was silent, and the only sound was the wind rustling through the sagebrush. Emily got out too, her face pale as she scanned the area. "Where did he go?" she whispered, her voice trembling. We searched around the car, but there was no trace of the man. It didn't make any sense. One moment he was there, and the next he was gone. Panic started to set in, and I couldn't help but feel like we had just witnessed something supernatural. Suddenly, the car radio crackled to life, even though it had been turned off. A voice came through the static, low and distorted. It was the man's voice, humming that same eerie tune. Emily screamed, and I quickly shut off the radio, my hands shaking. We got back in the car, locking the doors behind us. I floored the gas pedal, desperate to get away from that place. As we sped down the road, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man's face staring back at me. But the back seat remained empty. We didn't stop until we reached the next town, a small, dusty place with a few rundown buildings. We found a motel and checked in, barely saying a word to the clerk. The room was shabby, but it felt like a sanctuary after what we had just experienced. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man's gaunt face and heard that haunting melody. Emily was just as shaken, clinging to me as if letting go would make the man reappear. The next morning, we tried to make sense of what had happened. We searched online for stories about Route 66 and came across a chilling legend. Apparently, there were reports of a ghostly hitchhiker who had been seen by travelers for decades. According to the stories, he had died in a car accident on that stretch of road back in the 1950s, and ever since, his spirit had been wandering the highway, looking for a ride that would take him home. We were horrified. Had we really encountered a ghost? The more we thought about it, the more it seemed like the only explanation. The man's outdated clothes, the cold chill in the car, his sudden disappearance, it all matched the stories we read. We decided to cut our trip short and head back home. The thrill of the open road had been replaced by fear, and neither of us wanted to risk another encounter with the unknown. To this day, I can't drive down a deserted highway without looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that hitchhiker again. We never spoke about it to anyone, worried that people would think we were crazy. But Emily and I both know what we saw, and we both know that there are some things out there on the open road that can't be explained. So, if you ever find yourself driving down Route 66 and you see a lone hitchhiker by the side of the road, think twice before you stop. Because some passengers are not looking for a ride, they're looking for something much darker. I'm Tom, and what I'm about to tell you happened to me and my friends one fateful night on a road trip that we'll never forget. We were young, adventurous, and maybe a little too reckless for our own good. It was the summer of 2023, and my friends Sarah, Mike, and Lisa and I were driving cross-country, taking the scenic route through rural America. We had been on the road for days, and the constant driving was starting to wear us down. So when we saw the sign for a motel that looked like it had seen better days, we were relieved. It was late, and we needed a place to crash. The motel was tucked away off a deserted highway, surrounded by tall, overgrown grass. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting a dim light over the old building. The place seemed abandoned, but the vacancy sign was lit up. We were tired and didn't want to drive any further, so we decided to check in. The lobby was dusty, with cobwebs in the corners and old furniture covered in sheets. The clerk at the desk was an elderly man with a gruff demeanor, but he gave us a key to one of the rooms without much fuss. We couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but we were too exhausted to care. We took our bags and headed to our room. The room was as run down as the rest of the motel. The wallpaper was peeling, and the furniture was old and worn. But we were too tired to complain. We tossed our bags onto the beds and decided to grab some food from the vending machine down the hall. As we walked down the hallway, we noticed that it was eerily quiet. The only sound was the creak of our footsteps on the old floorboards. Sarah joked about the place being haunted, but none of us took her seriously. We bought snacks and returned to our room. That's when things started to get strange. We heard odd noises coming from the room next door, thumps, dragging sounds, and occasional whispers. We tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the old building settling, but the noises only grew louder. It felt like someone was moving around, pacing back and forth. Mike, being the bravest of us, decided to investigate. He knocked on the door of the neighboring room but got no response. The door was locked, and there was no sign of anyone inside. He came back to our room looking unsettled but didn't say much. We all tried to get some sleep, but the noises continued, and none of us could rest. In the middle of the night, Lisa woke up to a soft, mournful crying coming from the hallway. She tried to wake the rest of us, but we were all too deep in our uneasy slumber. She got out of bed and went to investigate. When she reached the hallway, the crying stopped suddenly, and she felt a cold breeze brush past her. Lisa returned to the room, pale and shaken. She told us about the crying and the strange feeling of being watched. We decided it was best to leave the motel, but when we went to check out, the clerk was nowhere to be found. The lobby was empty, and the key was still sitting on the counter. We were trapped. Our attempts to leave were futile. The doors wouldn't open, and the windows were locked tight. It was like the motel had become a prison. We tried calling for help, but our phones had no signal. It was as if the motel existed in its own isolated world. As the hours passed, the noises grew more intense. We heard footsteps outside our room, doors slamming, and faint, ghostly voices. The atmosphere became suffocating, and fear gripped us all. We were no longer sure if we were dealing with a haunted building or something more sinister. Eventually, we managed to break a window and escape into the night. We ran back to the highway, not looking back. We found a gas station and called for help. The police arrived, but when they investigated the motel, they found it completely deserted. There were no signs of recent activity, and the clerk was nowhere to be found. They told us it was likely a case of a very old, abandoned property with no one around. We tried to tell them about the noises and the feeling of being watched, but they dismissed it as exhaustion and stress from the long trip. We were left with our own unsettling memories and the eerie feeling that something supernatural had happened to us. To this day, none of us can explain what happened at that motel. We often talk about it, trying to piece together the mystery, but the answers elude us. The abandoned motel remains a chilling reminder of that night, and we all agree that some places are better left undisturbed. So, if you ever find yourself driving late at night and come across a rundown, seemingly abandoned motel, think twice before checking in. Some places hold secrets that are better left buried in the darkness. Hi, my name is Laura. What I'm about to share with you happened to me and my family on a road trip that turned into a terrifying ordeal. It's a story that still gives me chills whenever I think about it. It was late October 2023, when my husband Dave, our teenage son Jake, and I decided to take a family road trip through the Appalachian Mountains. We had planned the trip for months, hoping for a peaceful escape from our busy lives. We had heard that the scenic drives through the mountains were breathtaking, especially during the fall when the leaves turned brilliant shades of red and orange. We left early in the morning, eager to explore the beautiful landscape and enjoy the crisp mountain air. The drive started off smoothly, with clear skies and the gorgeous autumn scenery, making us feel relaxed and excited. The GPS guided us through winding roads, and everything seemed perfect. But as the sun began to set, we found ourselves on a more isolated stretch of highway. The scenery changed from picturesque forests to darker, denser woods. The road was narrow and winding, and the trees seemed to close in around us. It was beautiful in a haunting sort of way, but I began to feel a sense of unease. "Mom, this is kind of creepy," Jake said from the back seat, his voice tinged with nervousness. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw him looking out the window at the darkening forest. "It's just the way the road is," I reassured him. "We're almost through this stretch." That's when we first saw a rusty old truck that appeared out of nowhere. It was an ancient model, the kind you'd expect to see in a junkyard, with peeling paint and a worn-out look. The truck was huge, and it seemed to be moving at a much faster pace than our car. I could barely make out the driver through the dim light of dusk. He had a scruffy beard and a wide-brimmed hat that obscured his face. The truck's headlights were bright, cutting through the darkness and reflecting off the trees. "Maybe he's just in a hurry," Dave said, glancing at the truck as it roared past us. "Let's not worry about it." But as we continued down the road, I noticed something strange. The truck had slowed down and was now following us. Its headlights were a constant presence in my rearview mirror, and it seemed to be getting closer. "Dave, that truck is still behind us," I said, my voice growing more anxious. "It's been following us for a while now." Dave frowned and looked back, but the truck was far enough behind that he couldn't see it clearly. "It's probably just a coincidence," he said, trying to sound reassuring. However, the truck's presence grew more menacing. It stayed close, its headlights glaring through our mirror. Every time we sped up, the truck did too. It was like it was toying with us, deliberately matching our speed. The tension in the car was palpable. Jake was nervously tapping his fingers on the seat, and Dave was gripping the steering wheel tightly. I could feel my heart racing, and every time I glanced back, the truck seemed even closer. "Should we pull over?" Dave asked, his voice strained. "Maybe it's just another driver having trouble." "I don't think that's a good idea," I replied. "What if it's not just a regular driver?" We decided to keep going, hoping to find a place to stop where we could safely assess the situation. As we rounded a bend in the road, we spotted a small, run-down gas station with flickering lights. It looked like the kind of place that hadn't seen many customers in years, but it was our best option. Dave pulled into the gas station, and we all piled out of the car. The truck, which had been following us, stopped across the street, its engine idling. The driver didn't get out. Instead, he just sat there, watching us through the truck's grimy windows. I tried to calm everyone down as Dave approached the old, rickety payphone to call for help. The gas station attendant, a grizzled old man, emerged from the small building, looking just as worn out as the place he worked at. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "We've been followed by that truck," Dave explained, pointing to the vehicle across the street. It's been tailing us for miles, and we're a bit unnerved." The attendant glanced at the truck and then back at us, his face growing serious. "That truck's been around these parts for years. Rumor has it that the driver's a ghost, doomed to drive this stretch of road forever." We were skeptical, but didn't have much choice. We asked if we could use the phone to call for help, and he agreed. As Dave talked on the phone, we kept a wary eye on the truck. The driver's hat was still pulled low, and the truck remained eerily still. Suddenly, the truck's engine roared to life, and it began to move again. It slowly crossed the street, turning toward us with an ominous rumble. The atmosphere was charged with fear as the truck approached, its headlights casting eerie shadows. The attendant, seeing our fear, quickly advised us to get back in the car and stay inside until the authorities arrived. We followed his advice, huddling in the car as the truck came to a stop directly in front of us. The driver's face remained hidden, but we could see the dim light of his eyes reflecting through the truck's windows. Minutes felt like hours as we waited. The truck remained stationary, as if it was waiting for something. Just as we began to lose hope, the sound of sirens pierced the silence. The truck's engine roared one last time before it sped away, disappearing into the night. The police arrived shortly after, but by the time they investigated, there was no sign of the truck or its driver. They assured us it was likely just an aggressive driver, but the old attendant's story stuck with us. We left the gas station as soon as we could, and the rest of our trip was spent in uneasy silence. Every time a vehicle approached us on the road, we'd tense up, half expecting to see the phantom truck reappear. Even now, when I drive through isolated areas, I can't shake the memory of that night. The phantom truck remains a chilling reminder of how a simple road trip can turn into a nightmare. And if you ever find yourself driving through the Appalachian Mountains, keep an eye on your rearview mirror. Because sometimes the things that follow you are not always of this world. Hello, I'm Eric, and what I'm about to share is something I've kept to myself for a long time. It's a story that has haunted me ever since my family and I stumbled upon a town that seemed to be cursed. It was the summer of 2024 when my wife Karen, our two kids, Lily and Ben, and I decided to take a road trip through the Midwest. We were looking for a peaceful getaway, a chance to explore small towns and enjoy some quality family time. We had heard about a charming little town called Ravenswood, known for its historic buildings and picturesque scenery. It seemed like the perfect place to stop and take a break from our long drive. We arrived in Ravenswood just as the sun was setting. The town looked like something out of a postcard, with its quaint streets, old-fashioned storefronts, and beautifully restored homes. The evening light cast a warm, golden glow over everything, making it seem like the ideal place to spend the night. We found a cozy-looking bed and breakfast at the edge of town. The innkeeper, an elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson, welcomed us with a warm smile and showed us to our room. The inn was charming, with antique furniture and old-fashioned decor. It felt like stepping back in time. After settling in, we decided to explore the town a bit. Mrs. Thompson gave us a map and suggested a few places to visit. She mentioned that Ravenswood was known for its local legends, but she spoke of them in a casual, almost dismissive manner. We didn't think much of it and headed out to explore. As we walked through the streets, we noticed that the town was eerily quiet. There were few people around, and the ones we did see seemed to be in a hurry, their faces expressionless. It was odd, but we chalked it up to the late hour. Our first stop was a small diner on Main Street. It was a classic American diner with a vintage feel. We ordered some food and chatted about our plans for the next day. The waitress, a young woman with a tired expression, served us with a forced smile but didn't say much. The food was decent, but there was a strange taste to it that we couldn't quite place. After dinner, we walked back to the bed and breakfast, deciding to call it a night. The streets were even quieter than before, and the only sound was the distant chirping of crickets. As we approached the inn, we noticed that the lights were flickering, casting odd shadows on the walls. That night, we had trouble sleeping. The beds were uncomfortable, and the room felt unusually cold. Lily and Ben complained about strange noises coming from the hallway, but we reassured them that it was probably just the old building settling. Around midnight, we were all awakened by a loud banging noise coming from the front of the inn. Karen and I exchanged worried glances and decided to investigate. We quietly made our way downstairs, trying to avoid waking the kids. When we reached the lobby, we found the front door wide open, despite it being locked when we went to bed. The innkeeper, Mrs. Thompson, was nowhere to be seen. The front desk was empty, and the air felt heavy, as if something was about to happen. We decided to close the door and lock it, but as soon as we did, the banging started again, louder and more insistent. It sounded like it was coming from outside, but when we looked through the windows, we saw nothing but darkness. The street was deserted. Feeling uneasy, we went back to our room and tried to get some rest. But the noises continued throughout the night, whispers, footsteps, and the occasional loud thump. It felt like the house was alive with restless energy. The next morning, we found Mrs. Thompson at breakfast, acting as if nothing unusual had happened. When we asked her about the noises in the open door, she just shrugged and said it was probably just the wind. We didn't buy it, but we didn't want to press the issue. After breakfast, we decided to explore the town further. We visited the local library and asked about Ravenswood's history. The librarian, a middle-aged man with a somber expression, reluctantly shared that Ravenswood had a dark past. According to local legend, the town had been cursed many years ago after a series of tragic events. The story went that a wealthy family had lived in Ravenswood, but they were accused of dark magic and cursed by a vengeful neighbor. The entire family had disappeared mysteriously, and ever since, the town had been plagued by strange occurrences and misfortunes. Many believed that the curse had never been lifted, and that was why the town seemed so strange and unsettling. We were intrigued but didn't know what to make of it. Deciding to see more of the town, we visited a few more places, including an old cemetery on the edge of town. The cemetery was overgrown and neglected, with broken headstones and crumbling statues. As we wandered among the graves, we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. When we returned to the inn, things took a turn for the worse. The kids were acting strangely, claiming they had seen figures moving outside their window. Karen and I were on edge, but we tried to stay calm for the sake of our children. That night, the disturbances in the inn escalated. The noises became more aggressive, and the temperature in the room dropped significantly. The kids were terrified, and we decided that we needed to leave immediately. We packed our things and tried to check out, but Mrs. Thompson was nowhere to be found. The front door was locked, and we had to force it open to escape. The streets of Ravenswood were even more deserted than before, and the air felt oppressive. We drove away from the town as quickly as we could, not looking back. The sense of relief was palpable when we finally reached a more populated area. We were all shaken by the experience, and the unsettling feeling of Ravenswood lingered with us for days. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that town. We never found out what caused the strange noises, the cursed history, or the eerie atmosphere. Ravenswood remains a dark and mysterious chapter in our road trip, a place that we hope never to revisit. So, if you ever find yourself traveling through the Midwest and come across a town that seems too quiet, too perfect, or too strange, think twice before staying the night. Some places carry old, dark secrets that are better left undisturbed. If you want to see more horror stories, please like the video, share your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Stay with us, thank you, and see you in the next videos.